Welcome. In today's video, I'm doing a tutorial that's going to step by step show you how to create the summer mesh vest. And I have placed this pattern at sort of an intermediate level, and that's because there are increases and decreases, and we have 4 buttonholes down the front of the vest. But other than that, it is a pretty straightforward pattern in order to follow along. So you don't need any special materials. It's our standard crochet kit in order to create the vest. Again, you will need 4 buttons to close the front, and I'm using a 3mm hook in order to work on the entire vest. So just one hook for everything. Now, as always, I do put lots of pictures and links and video clips and everything on my Ravelry site, or you can find a link to the pattern on my website as well. And I am using 2 different weight yarns for this vest. So in previous videos for vests, I have done a little bit of information on if you're trying to calculate substitutes or different weights of yarn, to look not only at the gauge and the stitches per inch, but really also pay close attention to the final measurements to make sure that you're doing the right adaptation. So on the weight 1 yarn, I picked this because I prefer the blue. It's a steel blue, and it is giving me 12 mesh stitches over 4 inches for my gauge. But what's important to note, if I'm doing a 5-row repeat, my 5 rows are about 1.5 inches in the blue. And that's because this is a weight 1 yarn. But you could easily, again, if you can't find the yarn, adapt it with different yarns. Now the white yarn I'm using is a Bernat Softy Baby. It did come in a lot of colors, including a navy, but I preferred the steel blue that was in my stash. But again, you can consider this as a substitute because the white yarn I'm using, the blue is a bamboo, the white yarn I'm using is the Softy Baby acrylic. And again, it's in the white color. And when I swatched out the mesh stitch in the white, so this is the 3-weight yarn, I am getting the same stitch count. So again, over 4 inches, I was getting 12 mesh squares. But the difference is, again, if I'm doing a 5-row repeat of mesh squares, in the white, which is the heavier yarn, that measured 2 inches across. So again, if you want consistency, in the 5 inches, I was only getting 1.5 inches and just shy of 2 inches in the blue. So if you are going to substitute, that would be where to pay particular attention, because I was getting about the same stitch counts. It was the rows that mattered. So let's look at exactly how I did my mesh stitch, because there are different heights and versions. And I was initially thinking I might have to do a smaller mesh stitch in order to not have the vest so lacy. But when I started this, the overall end product I think is lovely. So I'm doing a double crochet mesh stitch height on this. And please ignore the bad videos. I find the close-up videos really hard to do as a lefty and get any clarity on them. So please watch lots of amazing tutorial videos out there for how to complete the mesh stitch. But just in case there's any confusion, I'll show you exactly how I did it so that you can compare methods if there are different heights or different stitches that you want. So I'm just going to quickly chain a couple of stitches in the white just to make that maybe a little bit easier to see on the video. And what's important is when you start off the mesh stitch at the beginning, you could, again, for a 50 chain, end up with a longer chain than this. Make sure it's not all twisted. But the important thing when you start is to put a marker in the 3rd hole, and that's going to make it really easy to see which pickup stitch on row 2 you're going to need to look for. And as you start a double crochet height mesh stitch, I started in the 5th loop. So again, your very first square is going to be doing a double crochet plus chain in the 5th loop. And we're doing the double crochet and chain because you're going to, for the mesh stitch, skip every 2nd hole and that's what you're going to chain for. So you're going to work every second stitch as you go across. So let's just quickly look at that again, so you don't have to reverse the video a million times. I'm going to chain again any number of stitches that is outlined in any pattern for the mesh stitch. So in the medium vest that we're going to work on today, our chain is actually the side of the vest that attaches the front panels and back panels. So we're going to chain along the side, and at the right number of chains, you just want to put a marker again in the third stitch. So that really will help you in row 2 figure out where the end of your post is. And for a double crochet height, I'm going to create the first double crochet in the 5th loop. And again, the stitch for a mesh stitch is do a double crochet, chain on top of that in the same post, and then skip the next stitch and start your repeat in the following stitch. So it's always going to be double crochet, chain, skip, double crochet, chain, skip in the second stitch. And we're going to do that along the row just to again create the squares for the mesh stitch. So important to note that if you've chained 50 as an example for your first chain, you will not end up with 50 stitches. You're going to end up with 48 at the end of your chain because of how we've started the first chain on this, actually, the first row on this chain. So let's just work across, and then I'll quickly show you, and there'll be other videos. I'll do this again as I'm creating the longer chains for the vest, but I'll do a quick demo of how I'm going to do increases and how I'm going to do decreases with this double crochet mesh stitch. So again, pretty easy stitch once you work across the pattern. And again, please do not, judge my horrible videos. And you're also going to notice my stitch squares aren't really that, clean of a gauge, because I'm just trying to make sure I take good videos and not actually pay attention to the crochet. So when we get to the beginning of each row, I want you to chain 3, and that's how we're going to start each of the rows. So we have 3 chains on the end of each row, and we're going to turn and start the beginning. In order to create the post at the end of each row, I want you to go into the middle stitch here. So the first stitch after my chain, I'm going to go in and do a single crochet. And then I'm going to go into the very first bar of the single crochet I already made and yarn over so I can get 2 loops on my hook again in order to do a stacked single crochet. So I'll do a second single crochet right on top of the first one, and then a chain. And that is basically going to act as my double crochet post at the beginning of each row. So now if I turn my work over, you can see my first chain from the first row, and I want to again skip that first opening and go into the first post. So I have my posts lined up one on top of each other, and do my double crochet plus chain into that stitch. And now I've created 2 squares, one on top of each other, and that's how we're going to start each of our rows and continue to work across just this little demo piece. And I'll show you how to do an increase and a decrease as well. So there we go, we're at the end. So like we did at the other row, we're going to chain 3, and as we create our very first post, we're going to do a single crochet, use the bar to create a second single crochet on top of the first single crochet, and this is going to give us our first post. Now the difference if we're doing an increase is I'm going to make the first post right on the edge of the previous row, and that's going to make this first square stick out quite a bit. And that's how you do an increase at the edge of a row. You're going to see here it really juts out because I didn't put it into the first post to line everything up nicely. So that's a simple way of doing an increase for the mesh stitch. Now, if I just work a couple of stitches in so we can show you a decrease, there's 2 different ways to do a decrease. The first one we're going to show, sorry, is if you do a decrease at the end of a row. So I'm in the post just before the last post on the row, and you can see here I have the one more post lined up at the edge to finish off my row. Well, if I want to decrease here, I actually need to not complete this double crochet. So I'm just going to pop it out here because we're only going to do half the double crochet. So I'm going to go into the post and only do one yarn over pull through. So I've got 2 loops on my hook. Then I'm going to go into the edge post. So I want to pick up again that 3rd stitch. Going to pick up the very last one so I can connect this to the last post that's the edge of our work. So yarn over, pull through, so you have 3 loops on your hook, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull through all 3. So that is going to be a mesh stitch decrease at the end of a row. Now we do slightly different at the start of a row. So like we did for any other beginning, so when I did the increase here at the beginning, or I did any of the edge posts, if we want to do a decrease at the beginning of the row, we're going to chain 3 as if we were again going to create that edge post. But instead of doing that, I'm going to do my first double crochet, and that's going to pull those 3 chains in quite tightly on an angle and create a decrease at the beginning of a row. So you can see I've got a decrease at the end of a row and then a slanted decrease as we pulled in at the start of the row. And again, much easier to see when you've got way more stitches and a much bigger project. So I'll show these as we continue to work on each of the panels and highlight exactly where and when we're doing increases or decreases in order to create the 2 front panels or the slight decrease on the neckline for the back. So again, easy to do a mesh stitch. I'm doing a double crochet height for the sort of size of the square opening that you're going to get. And that means we're doing every 2nd stitch with a double crochet chain and skipping them to make the gaps for the actual holes on the mesh stitch as well. So we've got a decrease on one side, and now that I've done the full row, it's a bit wonky, but as you continue on, you'll see that I've pulled in an increase on the far side when I actually demo these correctly. So let's take a look at how we're going to start off the front panels in order to work on the pattern. So let's begin the tutorial by working on the 2 front panels. And again, as a left-handed crafter in the video, I'm starting at the bottom and going up from the hem to the armhole. So again, if you're right-handed, just make a note if you started at the armhole to work your way down. For the size medium, I'm going to chain 49 plus 1 for the turning chain. So we're going to chain 50 as we start off. And again, I'm doing a menswear inspired vest. So like the double-breasted vest versions that I've made that are menswear inspired, this one is going to be different because it's a single-breasted, but it does have that point along the hem. So we're going to be doing increases, and then we'll do a single-breasted version. So again, we're going to chain for the size medium 50 stitches to start us off. And as I showed in the mesh stitch demo, we're going to put a marker in the 3rd loop from the end in order just to make a note of where we have to connect back in row 2. And we're going to start the mesh stitch in the 5th loop, which again is going to be a double crochet chain. Then we skip a stitch and do double crochet chain in every 2nd stitch across the row. So for size small, our front panel is 8.5 inches, our medium is going to be a 9-inch panel, and our large ends up being about 9 3/4 to 10 inches on the panel. So for row 1, again, we've added the chain in the 3rd stitch, and we're going to work our way across the row to create the mesh stitch row 1. When we get to the end of the first row, we're going to chain 3 to create a post to start us off on the next row. So very easy to create these edge posts so we've got a really consistent edge. So chain 3, and then in the middle post, or the first post next to your hook, we're going to make a single crochet. We're going to pick up the bar of that first single crochet and do a yarn over so that we have a second opportunity to create a stacked single crochet, and then again we're going to chain to make the edge stitch. So work your way back across row 2, and really important as we start to add markers that are different colors for the 2 ends of your rows. So I'm using an orange marker here for the underarm, and I'm using a green marker for the hem because we have a lot more hem increases than we do for the underarm. So again, very straightforward as we do the first 5 rows in white for a size medium. And again, if we're going to make an increase, we start the same process where we chain 3 at the end of a row in order to create a new post. And really the only difference is going to be where we start that post and where we connect it back to the next row. So what we'd like to do is create 5 of these mesh rows, and again the green will have more increases on the hem than we do on the shoulder or the underarm, which I'm marking in orange as we work across the front. And again, I'm working from left to right, and I'm working on the left panel as you kind of look at the vest in the video. It's the right panel if you're wearing it. So we'll work along to the underarm, and again continue to make 5 rows in white of this mesh stitch repeat. If you're doing a medium, you'll end up with 26 plus 1 squares at the end of your 5 rows, and then we're going to switch into the blue. And I do that by not completing the entire double crochet. I slip the blue over the loop and then complete the double crochet and the chain 1 in the very last stitch, and then I will chain 3 as I've done for the other rows in order to create the new edge post in this much lighter 1 weight kind of blue yarn. So the same process where in the next stitch you're going to create 2 stacked single crochets and a chain in order to create your starting post. And if you're doing an increase, as we are going to do here in the blue, you want to make sure again that you're connecting this post into the edge stitch, not skipping a stitch and starting it to stack it above the previous squares. And it's going to create a very obvious bump out so that you really can see that you've created an increased stitch on the row. So again, I'm going to go into the very first kind of post that's the edge of the previous row, and I'm going to create the double crochet chain as my very first mesh stitch, which is going to give me again this little bump out. So you can see that I've made an increase in blue here. And important as you kind of start to work back on the row, again, I can't emphasize enough because you're putting this work down over the next couple of weeks and you'll forget which end was the hem and how many increases and which one was the shoulder or the underarm. So we continue just working along the row, but now in blue with the same stacking of mesh stitches, one on top of each other. So I'm just working into each previous post. But again, don't forget, as I did, to put that lovely green marker back on the hem so that we can see where we were working from. So again, an increase at the end is just, again, making sure that you stop and do the 3 post increase, and then you can loop it back on in order to create a loop that is the beginning of your next row. And even though it's really tiny, you can see when I put the green hook on that I do have an increase here at the end of the row. So work your way back up. This is row 6 on a medium, and we will connect again once you've hit the underarm in order to chain then to the shoulder. So we have to take this underarm section up to the shoulder, and we're going to do that by chaining additional stitches. So once you've got to the underarm in a size medium, chain another 50 stitches as we had done at the beginning, and that in the blue is going to take you to the lower part of your shoulder on the actual vest. And once you've done that, you're going to do exactly what we did at the beginning, add a marker to the 3rd stitch, begin in the 5th stitch, and again then that's going to be 50 that we chained, 48 mesh stitches, or if you're counting the squares, you will have added 24 squares. So in a size medium, by the time we get to the underarm with the increases we did, we're at 27 squares. We've added 24 squares, and so if you're working on a medium, again, you've chained to the shoulder to be able to create that increase. Then work your way back to the hem and continue to complete 5 rows of the blue mesh stitch. And then again, we're going to change colors. Start with the stacked single crochet chain edge post, and switch over to white to do again 5 rows of the white. So again, I change colors in my last double crochet just to be able to do a clean color change. Then I do a chain 1, and then I'm going to create the additional 2 chains in order to make my post. So at the end of the double crochet chain, you want to make sure at the end of the stitch you have 3 chains. So again, if I'm increasing a row, I'm going to go right and connect this to the very edge stitch, which matches the edge of my previous rows. And if I don't want an increase, you're going to skip the first mesh and go into the second. So again, that's an easy way of showing here in white what I showed earlier in blue for an increase. Easy to see that I've increased at the end of the row, and there are again more hem increases than there are shoulder increases as you work across the front. So pretty straightforward as we do the mesh stitch, and we're going to continue on with 2 rows of the blue and 3 of the white. So continue on as you change to white here. We're working across the front until we get to where we want to decrease the neckline. So just again, continue working each row of the mesh stitch along and making sure that you do the increases as marked in the patterns for the various different sizes. Now, once we reach the shoulder, we do need to start decreasing to create the V-neck, but we want to actually make the final increase for the point. So again, you can wear just the V-neck version of this vest without adding any collars onto it. But because the mesh stitch is a, kind of larger double crochet stitch, in order to do the decrease for the neck, we're not going to sort of combine stitches together. We're going to do a staggered decrease to give us a much more flattering neckline. So let's look at now that we're going to switch back over in the 5th pattern of the 5-row repeat, so the 5th set of those, sorry. We're going to start at the neckline and do a decrease in white as we go down towards the hem. So let's begin the V-neck decrease, and we're going to stagger our decreases again because we have a larger double crochet height stitch with the mesh stitch. So as we begin at the shoulder and we've changed over from blue to white, we are going to, in the first 4 mesh stitches, do a single crochet chain instead of a double crochet chain. Then in the 5th stitch, we're going to switch back to our regular double crochet chain mesh stitch and continue on for the row. And let me first describe how we're going to make this final increase at the hem to make a very significant point. So at the end of this first row, I want you to do a last increase on the white to create, again, the final point for the hem. And as we work back up, I'll come back and talk about the neckline increases, but I'm going to show you then as you come back down how we need to leave that point unworked and do a last decrease. So again, I reminded people at the end of a row when you're doing a decrease, you stop halfway through your double crochet so that you still have 2 loops on your hook. Then I want you to do here as I've done, pick up the very last post and pull through all 3. So I've done a decrease on the end of the row. And then to do a decrease at the start of a row, I'm going to chain 3, turn the work, and instead of creating a post, I'm going to just connect that back to the next post in. So skip a stitch and go into the next post. And that's going to create a nice sort of decrease at the start of this row. So I did again a half double crochet, so I had 2 loops on my hook, pick up the very last post, leaving the point of the hem unworked, and then do a second decrease as I start the next row. So this is what's going to create sort of a very distinct point at the bottom of our hem, while we're also working the decreases at the next at the neckline, sorry. So again, the decrease on the hem is to leave that last stitch that you created, the last increase unworked, and then start your decreases as you kind of continue to come back up. So that'll give us a nice point again at the bottom. Now if we go back to where we left off at the top, so just sort of ignore that I've done the hem, I'm just going to kind of again show that in one set for you. I did originally 4 single crochets, then I did the 5 double crochets, and now I'm 9 marks out from the hem. So just double check here, I was 10 out, so double check that you've got 9 stitches, the first 4 single crocheted and then 5 of the double crocheted. Once you've got the correct number of stitches, in the first of those 5 double crochets, I want you to single crochet that very first stitch, and then we're going to turn the work, leaving the rest of those stitches unworked to start the decrease. So we'll turn over, and then we're basically going to repeat this 4-5 staggered decrease. So as you turn and work back down to the hem, you're going to do 4 single crochet chains in each of your posts, and then do 5 again double crochet regular mesh stitches with the double crochet chain as you go along. And for a size medium, I'm looking to start my polo neck V at around 14 centimeters. So I am going to, again, you can put a marker if that's helpful, do 4 of these staggered decreases to get me far enough down to have a nice polo neck. But again, you can easily adapt these decreases to the preferred depth of any V-neck that you would like, because you may not be preferring to do the polo neck collar that I'm going to show in the next video. You might just want to leave this as a nice V-neck for an alternative summer vest. So note, again, you can adapt this vest if you want a deeper V-neck, but you can also, if you need to make this vest slightly wider, again, just make sure that you're adapting your rows and beginning the decreases at the appropriate spot if you're adding 1 or 2 rows, again, to accommodate for any width additions that you want. So we have these final 5 rows of the white in the mesh, and then I also opted to do the polo collar and the 3 rows of finishing trim in the white as well. You could easily, though, switch that up to different colors depending on your preference. I did it again 4 decreases, and I had 1 ball of the yarn for a size medium in the white. That was enough to be able to do the collar, but not all of the trim. So you'll see that I do have the trim in the blue. I used 2 balls of the blue in order to be able to do all of the trim details as well. But again, lots of color options and variations as you play around. So we're finishing off again the neckline decreases over these last 5 rows in white. We're also doing the final point on the bottom hem and then doing decreases up over these 5 rows. And once you've completed all of those decreases, we are going to start the trim by doing a couple of rows in order to finish off the front panels and place our buttonholes on just one side or one panel. Now again, you can choose which side you do the buttonholes on. I did it on this first side, and again, I'm going to be showing in the next video how I also added a polo collar. So the V-neck here, I was aiming for again about 5.5 to 6 inches, and I did try 3 buttons but ended up with 4 buttonholes just so I don't have any gaps along that single-breasted front closure. So for the first row, before we do buttonholes, I'd like you to half double crochet the entire row and do every post and every skipped or opened mesh square stitch. So that is again going to double the amount of stitches that you do because you're filling in the skipped stitch as well as the post stitch. And that's going to be, again, a first row of half double crochet. Then we're going to chain 1, and on our return of the half double crochet, we are going to do a chain 1 and skip a stitch for each of the 4 buttonholes. So again, if you have larger buttons than I'm demoing, you can easily make larger buttonholes by, again, chaining 2, skipping 2 stitches. But I'm half double crocheting all the way down and making again a chain 1, skip a stitch for the buttonhole opening, and again all the way to the bottom. The third and final row that we're going to do is just to single crochet all the way back, and make sure that you're also single crocheting into those buttonholes so that you're kind of reinforcing and making a sturdy buttonhole. So again, that chained stitch that you did, you want to catch that, make sure you're doing a single crochet there as well, and that will just help reinforce your buttonholes. So again, one of our panels needs buttonholes all the way up and down the side in order to complete it. And so that's 2 rows of half double crochet. The middle row is where you're going to add the buttonholes, and then we just finish it off with the final third row as a single crochet the entire way up. So that completes our first panel, and now we're basically going to repeat the process for our second panel. So again, for a size medium, we chained 50, which gave us 48 stitches and 24 squares. We did, again, rows until we got to about 2 inches, where we chained another 50 stitches to take us from the underarm up to the shoulder. We did exactly the same process again for the opposite panel that we're doing for the first panel. So again, I started with the left panel as you're facing it. You are now working on the right panel or the opposite panel to what you did, and you're following exactly the same process in order to complete your second panel. So again, I started with white, so I have 2 stripes in blue, and I decided to do the collar and everything in white as well. Now the only difference with our back panel, which is also very easy to do now that you've mastered the mesh stitch for the front, is we don't have any hem increases. It's a straight bottom hem for the back panel. So you are going to find our back panel an absolute breeze because you're very familiar with the mesh stitch now. And we're going to follow along, but start in blue because we're attaching it to the white at the front. We want that stripe repeat. We're doing our increases at the arm and shoulder exactly as we did for the front panels. And of course, as I mentioned, we have no increases across the back hem. Now, if you did notice anything off with your gauge, or you made additions or changes to the front panels, you're just going to reflect that on the back panel so that it matches the front panel. And the only other difference is on the size small and medium, we have less rows under the arm. And again, we're just continuing that stripe repeat across, and the size large has some additional rows just to get the width. Now around the neckline, I've done 2 decreases on the one side to give us a bit of a dip, and then a double increase on the other side to take us back up to the shoulder. And that's just a simple chain 5 increase to give us 2 extra squares instead of 1. So again, this is the size large, showing the few extra rows just to give you that increased width, but the back panel is a breeze to put together if you follow the pattern with the rows and the counts for the squares for each of the different sizes. I've mapped each of those out. So now we can go ahead and do an assembly. Now I originally just basted some of the pieces together so I could double check fit, because I've mixed up different sizes here as I put things together. But you're going to actually put the right sides together, and then best to whip stitch along again that 8-inch side that we created and across the shoulder to the neckline. So again, you can tighten up the armhole if it is a bit loose for you. But again, I was sizing these so that you could wear it on its own, but it wouldn't be too tight if you put a t-shirt or something underneath. So that's all the assembly that we need, is those shoulders and the sides. And then don't do what I do, turn it back around, so flip it out so that the right side is facing out before you put on the buttons on the one side, because I put them all on the inside instead of the outside and had to redo it. So you've got 4 buttons that you'll just sew on, again on the side that is opposite the side you put the buttonholes on. And that is it. Your piece is finished and assembled. So you can again check fit and then finish it off. And in our next video, I'm going to talk about how we can put a polo neck collar on this and how I finished off all the trim and the options for that as well. So again, a nice summer vest, and I think it worked out perfectly on the sizing that we looked at. And if you want to wear it just as a V-neck with no polo neck, that's also possible. But please give us some feedback, give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you find the videos helpful or we could make some improvements. And I'll just repeat again that all of the proceeds from both the patterns and anything that we get if we reach our YouTube subscription targets will all be donated to charity. So if you purchased the pattern already, thank you very much. And if you subscribed, thank you. Greatly appreciate all those subscriptions. We really do look forward to seeing all your versions of our vests. And again, stay tuned. In the next video, I'll walk you through how to do the polo collar and the trim that I finished off this vest with.